Hey, Ebony, I haven't seen you all day. That's a rarity.
I know, it's been so long. Hi, everybody.
All right. Well, as folks join, I want to say welcome to everybody. And we are going to get started because I think that this may be because we're going to talk about visioning today. And that generally takes a little time. So we don't want to spend too much time letting folks in. So people can join as they will. And it's been a rough couple of weeks. And last week we had a rough week and shared some thoughts and grieved together and mourned a bit together. And this week I suspect there's going to be some of that. So I was going over my notes this morning and this afternoon and just recognizing the importance of making space, that is transgressive, to make space for all of the things that we're feeling. You know, if we think about what Bell Hooks is encouraging us to do, is to see each other as whole and complete human beings, especially in a world that tries to minimize who we are as whole and complete human beings, especially minimizing the role of emotion and of spirit. And we want to make sure that we don't do that. That's what teaching to transgress is about, right? That's what transgressing is about. And so we're going to begin by grounding ourselves and doing what we normally do with our land, labor, and life acknowledgement. And I'm going to encourage everyone who can and who's willing to and able to put your feet on the ground if you can. Sit in a way, I prefer to sit erectly because it allows more oxygen to get into my lungs. So if you can, please do that. And put your hands on your lap, palms up. Again, do what feels right to you. This is what feels right to me, but do what feels right to you. And I want to invite us to take a collective breath in and breathe out. And can someone begin with reading this first slide?
This land that we inhabit is physically situated in the original ancestral homelands of the Tongva people. We pay respect to the Tongva and all the indigenous people, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout their historical diaspora.
Thank you. And let's take another deep breath in and breathe out. Who can read this next slide?
We pay homage to those who were stolen from Africa, placed in bondage, falsely named as chattel, and forced into labor, who were called slaves but never submitted as such, who have always been fully human with an unbroken connection to the divine and to each other. We honor our African ancestors for the still unpaid labor which built what is now the Americas.
Thank you. Let's take another deep breath in. Hold it for a minute. And breathe out. Who can read this last slide?
To both our Indigenous and African forebears, we commit to the continued struggle for liberation and reparations, for it is only through freedom and justice that we truly give honor. Ashe.
We can all collectively unmute and say Ashe.
Ashe.
So last week we shared and grieved and mourned with each other around the 10 lives that were stolen by white supremacy in Buffalo. We shed tears and shared our feelings, and it felt like a whole lot to carry. And then a couple days ago, as we were still in mourning, we experienced another collective, terrible, terrible event with the theft of the lives of 19 babies and 2 teachers. And so I just want to hold space for that, what that does to our collective spirit a bit. I want to give a little space for those who feel moved to share what you're thinking and feeling, how that may be impacting you. Does anyone want to share?
I guess I can go. This just first the Buffalo shooting and then the children just really has me under. I just I just feel like I can't really handle like anything right now. It's just too much. And the ensuing news about how the police treated the parents and treated the children as dispensable just is really unbearable right now. And I'm trying to find comfort and ways to keep my spirit so that we can, you know, so that I can not center my own grief in all of this, and so that I can remain of use and of value and alive, you know, to this struggle. So that's where I am. I'm trying to find hope and connection with all of you as well. And I'm just keep coming across people who feel the same way and who are just struggling. And I'm really glad that you said about grieving and finding a space to grieve, because we're constantly just asked to just move on and just, this is how the way of the world, this is what the world is like, and just move on. No, this is not okay. This is not acceptable. We don't accept this. That's all I wanted to say.
Yes, yes, we don't accept that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else want to share?
Yeah, I'd like to hop on and share. I feel like it's been very difficult to process everything. I feel like there has not been space for each grieving moment that I wanted to. I don't even know how. I'm like, George Floyd's anniversary, still the Buffalo shooting, and now in Texas. And I'm like, just to still go about your day-to-day life and have time to honor these people the way that they deserve to be honored, and give myself time to like slow down and just think of the gravity of everything that's happened. It's been very difficult to do and painful. It's painful. And I'm just like, everything's moving so fast, and like it's just one thing after the other.
Yeah. Yeah. Others.
Hi, it's Ryan. And I just wanted to share that like this, it just feels like we're like in such a, there's this like moment of like it's like the 1970s, like where there was the DEA was created and there was like Angela Davis imprisoned and spirituality was being persecuted by the government. And I think for me, it's like finding that spirituality right now is the focus. And I think that what's different now between back then is that we have each other and we have communities like this. We have beloved communities and it's more intersectional. And I think in the 70s, we weren't united. I think there was division. And I think that as people say, hope is a discipline. And so I'm really treating it like a practice right now. So thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Anyone else?
Hi, I saw a hand go up as I started speaking. Yeah, I just feeling into these moments. Part of my experience is feeling like the textured responses from the collective and people at different levels of grief for what they're even holding when they're experiencing the grief. And I'm finding the way that narratives get spun and we're all so much more connected. I find myself exposed to so much more that is unhealthy without even really like with just trying to be connected. And so, yeah, I'm just holding different people at different levels with their understanding of what's actually going on. Yeah.
Thank you, Eric. Ebony?
I just wanted to share that it is and has been really, really heavy. And when I learned today about the school teacher's husband dying from a fatal heart attack, that just really took me out today. Like I couldn't stop sobbing for maybe, I don't even know how long, before a long time, that my daughter who was home came running out just like, Mom, are you okay? And it's just, we don't have to know our fellow human siblings personally to feel what they experience and what they feel. And so that just like was a lot for me,
Yeah.
to say the least.
Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody else want to share? So I'll just say that as a mom who was, has to send my children off to school every day, I couldn't bear to even let it in for the first day. I couldn't bear to watch it on the news. I couldn't bear to read the stories. I couldn't bear it. And I also know that there's spiritual armor that can be built up and invoked, and it's caused me to have to read it and have to research it and have to look into their faces because, we talked last week a bit about visioning. This, even the torturous way that these children's lives were taken, is, someone typed in the chat, by design, right? Someone visioned this world that enables such violence, that relies on such violence. And, you know, we asked in a way, we asked last week as we thought about the 10 lives stolen in Buffalo, what do we owe them? What do we owe them? What do we owe these children? What do we owe these babies? So we absolutely owe them our hearts and our tears and our grief and our mourning. And we owe them an alternative vision that we not just, you know, Robin Kelly talks about freedom dreaming, that we dare to dream a different world, but also have the courage to build that world. And I think that as we engage in these readings, but also engage, I pray that this space is a space that is one where we can radically imagine and build beloved community, even if it's mostly virtual. I'm grateful that some of y'all have decided to cross the virtual threshold and come out sometimes. So I'm grateful that some of y'all have come out and I've met you in the flesh. And, you know, that's what we have to do. Otherwise, we submit to a world that steals the lives of our grandmothers and our babies. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to submit to that world. I'm not going to send my children into that world. I'm not going to leave a world for future generations that does that. And so I think that this work that we're doing is not just about, you know, reading really, really important books and engaging intellectually, but the reason that we're talking about praxis is it's both what we think about and the intellectual tools that we develop, but it's what we do. What will we do? What will we do? And so I think that, you know, we can't call names and see photos of these children and of these teachers. And, you know, there's, as Ebony shared, a 20th victim when we think about the spouse, right? We can't do that and not also do work. And so this is the work. This is the work. Is there anyone else that wants to share before we get to some of the work? And we're going to start with a bit of a recap from last week and some things that we didn't cover last week. And if you read last week's readings, you remember that Bell Hooks says that if we're really to engage in a liberatory model of education, the classroom has to be fluid, right? We have to create space for what needs to be said, not just, you know, go according to lesson plans and according to syllabi, that we have to create the space that's needed to be created. And I didn't misspell holistic. I decided I spell holistic with a W because I don't mean like a hole in the ground. I mean like a whole, like the whole person. So that's how I spell holistic. Y'all can spell it however you want to spell it, but that's how I spell holistic. And we're going to talk about like holistic models of teaching and being, where we're not forced to suppress emotion and spirit, where we can live in our intellect and our spirit and our bodies and everything else all at the same time. And that said, we're going to pick up on some of the things that we didn't get to, but we're also going to move forward in a way that's necessary right now. Is there anything else that we need to talk about with regard to the state of the world right now before we get into some of the lessons and tools that we're learning?
I just wanted to uplift what's in the chat currently that someone submitted anonymously, I believe.
Okay, let me check, because you know I can't really see. From anonymous student, can we please also acknowledge the attack on a Taiwanese church that left 5 people wounded and killed Dr. John Chang. All of this by design, but extends to and includes the consistent erasure and invisibility of the pain and harm Asian, South Asian Americans. We should be acknowledging that crime against against Asians are up by 340+%. We need solidarity between our communities, and I'm finding it to be lacking even here. I apologize. I believe that womanism is supposed to be intersectional, but also that our anti-racism work and work to dismantle white supremacy should be inclusive. We can't reproduce harm against one another that systems and the people who designed them for self-benefit perpetuate against us all. As an activist in solidarity with other communities of color, as a parent, and as someone working with my orgs doing liberatory work, I still find myself without space for our pain to be seen and validated. And so I do apologize. And you're talking about the shooting in Orange County. And let me be clear that how I think that there's much validity to what's said about the erasure of Asian folks and Asian American folks and what's experienced. And I think it's also coupled with a sickness around numbers, right? The numbers of people, right? We're so used to mass killings now. And the idea of acknowledging things, and there have been a couple of other shootings this week that have not been acknowledged because the numbers haven't risen to the level of 10 or 20 or 22. And so I apologize for my lack of acknowledgement, and also want to acknowledge that there's ways in which even as we fight against desensitization and fight for inclusiveness, that it still permeates. Shabana says, I've been in pain for the violence against Asian Americans, and there has been absolutely insufficient solidarity in general with our communities. Thank you for the reminder. And while we always also welcome anonymous comments, I also want to encourage folks to not feel that you have to be anonymous. So there is value in, and I won't take it offensively. I'll take it as a calling in that sometimes needs to be had. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. Is there anything else, either anonymously or not anonymously? Okay. So we're gonna hop into this. So are there any new folks? There's more in the chat. Okay. All right, so I'm not looking at the chat right now. So if there are things that pop in the chat, please just say them because I'm not looking at the chat right now, okay? So I just wanna go through, the review a bit. So we talked last week about what it means to transgress. We talked about it as crossing lines, refusing to abide by prescriptive norms, and how that's absolutely necessary for people who are put into marginal spaces. We talked about teaching the whole person. We talked about mourning and grief. And we pulled some of that from the last reading from All About Love. We talked about how Bell Hooks talks about the classroom as a space of freedom, joy, and excitement, especially Black autonomous classrooms. And then she talks a bit about moving into desegregated space, which is really white supremacist space, right? And then my mother joined and talked about teaching beyond the classroom. My mother is a classroom teacher for decades, but also what teaching beyond the classroom means, rejecting the confines of the classroom and how all of us can adopt roles as teachers. What we didn't cover, and I won't get too much into it because it's 7:27, is multiculturalism and ethnic studies, which she doesn't explicitly talk about ethnic studies, but as she talks about multiculturalism and diversity, I think if we were to push bell hooks further and really recognize where we are now, what we're talking about really is ethnic studies. Some people talk about critical race theory. I think that's a very specific thing, but when we talk about ethnic studies, what we're talking about is a difference in subject matter, right? So correcting the record. And she talks a little bit about that, about inclusion and including different texts, right? Challenging the notion of a white male canon, right? So inclusion and making sure that different knowledge producers are embraced in the classroom. What she didn't really talk about in these terms is the role of ethnic studies as a different pedagogy. Although she talked about liberatory pedagogy, there's a specific ethnic studies pedagogy that's really tied to that conversation, right? So an ethnic studies pedagogy that says that in the classroom, we absolutely embrace readings and intellectuals, and we talk about ideas that, you know, might have words to them now, but there's also different ways of knowing that are part of an ethnic studies praxis, where we recognize that the teachings of our grandmothers, our own lived experiences, and all of those things are part of what we engage in and how we teach, right? How we teach. That it's important to give space to these kinds of conversations that we had just now, that it's important that we talk about and engage in a democratic process in the classroom where whoever is deemed the teacher is really more of a facilitator rather than kind of a hierarchical model that says that we hold, whoever is has the formal role as educator holds all knowledge. And she talks about a banking system where, you know, according to an oppressive model of teaching, we would be depositing information. And those who are receiving that information, the measure of learning would be the regurgitation of information, rather than all sharing information, all sharing knowledge, all sharing our intellectual tools together and walking through it together. So ethnic studies has a different pedagogy. And then finally, ethnic studies has a different epistemology, a reason for knowledge production, right? So the how we research piece and why we research piece is very, very different. And what she doesn't get into in this text, but I think that we should engage in, is recognizing, and again, I'm teaching from my own positionality as someone who was both saved by ethnic studies and who teaches in Pan-African studies, that ethnic studies is the only set of discipline that comes from community, right? It does not come from an ivory tower, right? It doesn't come from the institution itself. It comes from the movement on the ground. So when we think about the birth of ethnic studies and the formation of the first ethnic studies units at San Francisco State in 1968, that came from the Black Power movement, and then, you know, in short order, the Third World Liberation movement. And it was people demanding, students demanding, faculty demanding, community demanding an end to and a disruption to what's really a white supremacist model of education. And what Hooks does talk about is how academia really serves as a way, traditional academia really serves as a way to cement white supremacist patriarchal heteronormative capitalism. And what we need to do is be disruptors of those things. And so ethnic studies comes as a way of disrupting this model. And so the way in which and the why that we produce knowledge through ethnic studies is really meant to form intellectual tools that serve the revolution. Does that make sense to everybody? Is there anything else that needs to be shared from our review, or can we jump into what we were going to talk about for today? All right, so you all had a homework assignment, right? Your homework, does everybody remember what your homework was, and did you do it? Does anybody remember what your homework was, and did you do it? Caitlin's thumb is up. Anybody else do their homework? So I think really in this moment, it's really important that we engage in the hard work. I challenged you to steal some time to meditate and to vision. And part of what happens in the world that someone else is creating, that white supremacist, patriarchal, heteronormative capitalism has visioned and created, is that all of our time is taken. All of our time is taken. All of our time is taken with work, with the labor that's seen and unseen, paid and unpaid. All of our time is taken with constant crises. I really appreciated the way that Shabana offered it in the chat, that we move from grief to grief, that we move from crisis to crisis. And what that does is put us in a space where we're in constant response mode to someone else's agenda, And it's important, it's a revolutionary act to steal back time for ourselves. And so for me, sometimes that means waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning. For me, it sometimes means telling my dean, who says I have a report due today, that you're not gonna get that report until Monday. Even though I love you, I do actually really love my dean, but you ain't getting that from me today, right? And so we need to think about ways, to steal back time so that we can also, so Hooks throughout this text talks about self-actualization. And it's not something that we just encourage in others, it's something that we have to do for ourselves. And so the world tries to get us outside of ourselves, tries to confine us to kind of these shells of beings. And so it's a revolutionary act to say that we're gonna live in our fullest selves. So what I encouraged you all to do is at least once this past week, to steal time, to steal space to meditate, I said you could even cheat it a little bit and do 10 minutes, but I prefer that you do 20 minutes. And then come out of that meditation and write down your vision for the world. Someone else is creating a world where young white men can carry AR-15s and walk into grocery stores, right? Someone else is creating a world where police lobbies and gun lobbies have more power and influence than people. They're held as more sacred than our children and our people, even in sacred spaces like churches, right? Someone else is creating that world. And so we have to vision what kind of world we want to create for ourselves. That's what visioning is about. It's about the process of thinking about and then doing the hard work of building that world. Let me see if there's something else I need to address in the chat. Okay. Somebody else wakes up at 4 a.m. I'm glad I'm not the only one, Caitlin. So I want to offer what vision is, because we talk about visioning sometimes. There's a book called Black Visions by Michael Dawson. I love the book. It's a really thick book, so this is not for your summer reading list. This is for when you feel like really, really sitting down with something that you're gonna, Shabana said, some of you all go to bed at 4 a.m. And, you know, it's a book that's worth reading, but it's one that you'll probably need to engage with over the course of a year, maybe 6 months. But one of the things that Michael Dawson does in this book is he defines what vision is. And he says that vision is a set of ideas and values that cohere, that are used publicly to justify political stances and that shape and are shaped by society. So I think often about this definition, and I think about it in the context of, I had one of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life as an undergraduate professor. His name is Dr. Russell Adams. And Dr. Adams would often ask, well, what is it that you want to study? What is it that you want to research? And I would offer something. So I wanted to research at one time, DC statehood. And he said, well, what does that have to do with anything else? And before he would get into it, he would say, loose pearls, loose pearls. And so what he meant by that is sometimes you take issue positions that are just an issue position. But if you can't identify the string that connects all of your pearls, then your pearls are really just running around on the ground, right? Just rolling around on the ground. So vision is really that string that ties together your pearls. I think about it sometimes in terms of spirituality and what's happening on the attack on women's bodies right now, where people who claim to be pro-lifers are the same people who advocate for assault rifles, are the same people who will say that they believe in the death penalty. But if there's a fetus inside of a woman's body, you know, you better protect that potential life, right? Those are loose pearls. If you're going to be pro-life, you got to be pro-life. If you're going to call it pro-life, you got to be pro-life all the way. And so one of the things that would be brought up as we talk about vision, which can kind of translate in some senses into ideology, is we can think about those who are devout, especially Jesuit Catholics, but devout Catholics who, if they say pro-life, they're going to say pro-life means, yes, many of them are anti-abortion, and they will also be standing outside of prison to protest the death penalty. At least there's a string. I'm not saying I agree with the string, but at least there's a string tying their pearls together. So the question becomes, as we move forward, is what is our string? What is our vision? And there are alternative visions, different visions for the world. This photo that you see is probably one that you've seen before. Some of you know that there was an anthropologist who was studying, this was, I think, in the 80s, who was studying children on the continent of Africa. It's really, really problematic. But one of the ways that he did this was to kind of think about, I think it was competition or something that he was studying. And so he had a bucket of fruit and had all the children standing at one end of a field and said, whoever makes it to the tree first gets the bucket of fruit. And finds that the children, instead of racing each other to the tree, lock arms and run together to the tree to get the fruit. And this white anthropologist is baffled. Why would they do that? And the children explained to him, that's not fun to go get a bucket of fruit and watch everybody else have no fruit, right? Like their vision for joy is really everybody comes and gets the bucket of fruit and eats the fruit together, right? We can have different visions, even though we've been trained to believe that there should be a vision for the world where a lot powerful lobby groups, those with the most money, have the most influence, and their vision for the world is the vision that we live in. That doesn't have to be the vision that we live in, and that's why we have to do the work of visioning. So I want to encourage us. First, I'm going to ask, did anybody do their homework? Did anybody do their homework? Who wrote a vision statement? Oh, I was going to offer this before we get into the vision statements. So we see what Dawson says. I also wanted to offer that one of the reasons that we need a vision statement is because it keeps us from having loose pearls. We can think about objectives as pearls, right? But we have to always flow from vision, right? So we think about systems like education as flowing from vision. We think about systems like public safety as flowing from vision. We should think about systems like healthcare as flowing from vision. Everything should flow from vision so that it's not derailed, so that you're not led to believe that, you know, the privatization of education is somehow good when your vision says that everyone should have access to the same quality and actually receive the benefit to the same quality of things like education, right? You want to make sure that your issue positions, your pearls, don't just become loose pearls. And so with that, I want to ask if anybody did their homework and developed a vision statement. Caitlin did. Caitlin, you have a vision statement?
Yes, I do.
Great. You want to read it for us? Will you share it for us?
Okay, I will. I dream a world where we see and feel each other, where radical empathy shapes our words, actions, commitments, vision, where dignity is accorded every sentient being, from the deep core of the earth and expansive oceans to the furthest limits of the cosmos, where we sit with fear long enough to tremble and be stabilized, held and comforted by the strong arms of those who see no stranger, feel no separation. I dream a world lit by light, swaddled in gentleness, rimmed in wonder, gratitude, and awe, with room for darkness. I dream a world where we plan and act for 7 generations, backwards and forwards, with radically imaginative healing actions. I dream a world where tending, love, and manifesting beauty are the norms, exchanged as currency. I dream a world that prizes elders, celebrates babies, uplifts teens. I dream a world where we work with our hands, hearts, and imaginations, respect our bodies' intuitive wisdom, listen more than we speak. I dream a world of slow urgency, where we take time for ritual, grieving, repairing, transforming our relationships with our mother, our mothers, our brethren. I dream a world where peril gives birth to poignant, potent reawakening of who we are and what we mean to each other. I dreamed the world of Alexis, Audra, Adrian, Angela, Alice, Angel, Belle, Cornell, Melina, June, Ruth, Tony, Sequoia. May it be so. Ashe.
Ashe. Woo. That's really beautiful. That's really beautiful. Hmm. Anybody want to offer anything for Caitlin?
I just wanted to say that was really, really touching and inspiring. And thank you for sharing with us, Caitlin.
And I'm honored that my name was spoken. So I want to say that. Thank you. Anyone else? Does anyone else have a vision statement? Thank you, Caitlin. Does anyone else have a vision statement to share? Okay. So I want to remind you of what we're writing. Okay. And I want to encourage you, if you didn't do it last week, to do it this week. This process is a healing process. When we say we don't have to submit to the world in which we live, this is one of the ways we refuse to submit to the world as someone else has imagined it. We get to build our own world. We get to dream our own world and then build our own world. So again, these are kind of the guidelines for writing your vision statement. This is an example of my vision statement, which I won't share, but you can see on the screen. And then I want us to think about how all of the things that we're reading about are really about vision. And so, in teaching to transgress, some of the chapters that we read for this week, we read about feminism and womanism. We read about Black studies and being a Black academic. We read about essentialism and refusing to be essentialized. Who can quickly, and we also read about beloved community again. Who can quickly summarize, if you can? I think chapter 7 for me really sat with me, which was about feminist solidarity. And I didn't know if we'd get this far in class today because I thought we might have more vision statements, but I do want to talk about feminism and feminist solidarity as vision. Who can summarize what feminism is according to bell hooks? What is feminism according to bell hooks? And we actually started this class with this quote. What is feminism according to bell hooks? Do I need to remind y'all, or you remember?
I feel nervous to speak up because I might have misremembered it, but is it in the realm of the liberation of we're not all free, and no one's free until we're all free, basically. So the liberation of women and femmes means the liberation of everyone.
She says specifically feminism is a movement to end sexism and sexist oppression. So yes, we are talking about the liberation of women and femmes. And then in this chapter, she really delves down into what that means, because feminism, in her view, traditional approaches to feminism have been colonized by white feminists, right? That white feminists have dominated women's studies and have claimed feminism as their own, but she argues that feminism is actually for everybody. And a true feminism must also challenge racism and classism and heterosexism and transphobia. Do you all remember that conversation that she has there? So how is that different from, or how does that inform your thoughts about what feminism is, and how is that visionary in your view? So before you read bell hooks, what did you think feminism was? Was it only me that hated that word and said, I ain't no feminist? I told you a story about that. Was that only me, or did some of you, especially women of color, did some of you also say that? Shabana said that, Ebony said that. So Ebony or Shabana, Maria said that, or Maria, do you want to share what your view of feminism was before this, or earlier in life, before you kind of had a fuller grasp? Go ahead, Ebony.
Sure. I kind of thought feminism before this meant like that I didn't want to be a recipient of chivalry, or I didn't want, kind of like the example you shared about wanting a man to open the door for me, like I would have to deny those things to embrace feminism, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
and I didn't
get that a little bit more, say more, Ebony, because I think there's also particular reasons that Black women especially want men to open doors for us.
So I think Black women are expected to be so strong all the time and able to do sometimes even like things that we may not be physically built to do easily, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really receive the concept of feminism before getting a deeper understanding from Bell.
Yeah, Shabana.
I think that when and this is when I was a lot younger, when I was a teenager, I was a very fervent anti-feminist. And I saw feminism as, and of course I was growing up in Pakistan, and I saw feminism as a white liberal colonial construct that had no relevance to us, and that was essentially a tool of dominance, another tool of dominance. And I think for a lot of people, it was a tool that individualized us, that broke us up, atomized us from societies and communities and families into individuals. So I think that was my concept then. Of course, then I lived. So.
Right. And I think she goes into this a bit in the chapter on essentialism, right? Like the essential woman is thought of as like a white woman, and there's all these privileges that come with it. And a radicalized feminism, a Black feminism, a womanism, a feminism of color really challenges that. And I'm just gonna offer just one lesson that my daughter, my 18-year-old daughter, taught me about a year ago. So my daughter uses they, them pronouns and presents to the world as very feminine, right? And I didn't understand how they would be using they, them pronouns, but, you know, a year ago, right? And how are you a girl? Like, obviously a girl, you're not gender nonconforming. And what they taught me is that, no, I'm not a girl. I'm a Black girl. And the rejection for her of girlhood and womanhood was a rejection of an essentialized girlhood and womanhood. So, and I think that there's more to it now as they step into their gender identity, right? There's more to it now, but I think that there's a rejection of mainstream feminism by many women and femmes of color because it was this idea that it's a white woman's fight. And so this vision of a feminism that's for everyone disrupts that view of feminism. There's a whole lot in the chat that I'm not reading, I'm sorry. Okay, good. I think we offered a lot of that. I would put Tundi way on the spot, but then they'll be mad at me. But I learned a lot from that. And I think for me, that really helped to present feminism differently and helped me to understand gender identity differently, because I think most of us, and again, I don't want to essentialize women of color either, but many of us have had challenges identifying alongside white women. Can y'all hear me? Because my picture is frozen on here. Yeah, I'm good. Okay, so we're right at 8 o'clock. And what I want to encourage everybody to do is for next week, we only have 2 more classes, y'all. So for next week, please come with vision statements. Please see that as a radical act. Please see that as a way to honor all of the lives who've been stolen. Please see that as a way of challenging white supremacist, patriarchal, heteronormative capitalism. Please see that as a way, as a step forward as we seek to dismantle systems of oppression. Please use this as a step forward. And when we share with each other, I was especially inspired, and thank you, Caitlin. That was really, really beautiful. Please think about what Caitlin's words have meant, you know, for all of us as we think about alternative visions for the world. So with that, I'm going to stop here and just see if there's any last thoughts or questions before we close out for the night. All right, thank you, everybody. And we're going to encourage everybody to, everyone in your orbit, please love on them also as a revolutionary act. You know, we know that love is revolution. The world tries to get us to see each other as isolated and separate from one another. Refuse that as well. That's radical. All right, talk to y'all soon, inshallah.
Thank you. Thank you.